Harness makes it incredibly easy to onboard enterprise-grade deployment methods for your Kubernetes applications that are resilient and reusable across your organization. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you two methods for deploying a Kubernetes application in Harness. One relies on a simple manifest, with the services and artifacts hard-coded into this particular deployment. This can be useful for situations where you're simply deploying the latest versions of artifacts on a triggered deployment. I'll also show you how you can use runtime inputs into the pipeline to define what artifacts you're going to deploy, demonstrating how easy it is to reuse and scale your deployment practices and requirements across your organization. I'll then walk through how to onboard your application to demonstrate the flexibility of our platform to cover all major Kubernetes deployment vectors. To review, any Harness deployment stage will consist of 4 components. First is an overview, where we define what type of deployment you wish to conduct, provide a name, a description, tags. If you want to configure a new deployment template for something we don't currently support out of the box, like Salesforce, you can certainly do that here. But today we'll focus on Kubernetes. Next, you'll configure a service definition. This is where you will define your service to be deployed, such as the artifacts, and maybe some of the networking or components that are required in order to have a working service application. Third is going to be an environment, and this is ultimately where your service is going to be deployed. And this can consist of the infrastructure that you're ultimately deploying your service to, as well as any kind of environment variables or overrides that can help you define what you want your application to do and what artifacts and services you want to deploy depending on what environment it goes to. Maybe you want something different in prod, maybe you want something different in pre-prod. Environments allow you to define all of these particular configurations. And finally, you define your execution, which are the actions that are going to be conducted during the deployment. This can be your deployment methodology, such as a rollout, canary, or blue-green deployment. It can also include a variety of other steps, such as running sets of Selenium tests. It could be load testing. It could be chaos engineering, verification tests, builds from other pipelines. We have a large variety of steps out of the box, and any that we haven't covered, we have shell scripts, container steps, HTTP steps, lots of flexibility to incorporate everything that you need. To start, let's look at how we configure a basic Kubernetes deployment with the artifacts hard-coded in. Looking at this, we'll look how we've configured this service. We're using a Kubernetes deployment type. And we'll look at how we've configured this manifest here by simply saying that we're pointing at this particular manifest, this basic Kubernetes service. And this can come from any Git repository or any document store. In this particular situation, we're actually just using the built-in Harness file store for simplicity's sake. But this is the application we're going to deploy. It's a simple Nginx deployment. I've hard encoded the application. It's going to use the latest version. And I'll have a service to expose it so that we can actually access the particular endpoint pretty easily. So I'll go ahead and close that out. I'll kick that off. And I'll be back in just a second. All right, fantastic. The entire service deployment only took about 18 seconds. And we can actually go and look at that particular service. We can actually go and look at this particular service and see we have a working Nginx server. Now, of course, this is useful for deploying hard-coded artifacts. Perhaps you have a strategy to always deploy the latest, but what we find with our customers is they want to deploy different artifacts depending on what stage they're going to, and we have a way of defining that as well pretty easily. So diving into this particular Helm-style service, we're looking at this Kubernetes manifest, and we're actually able to override certain values in there by appending a values.yaml file here. And then we're actually able to define an artifact that we want to deploy by saying, this is the artifact repository I want to pull from. In this case, it's Docker Hub, but it can be any Docker v2 compliant registry. And I'm saying, this is an image path for an Nginx image that I've actually built myself. And then I'll ask what tag that I want to deploy on runtime. But this can be passed in by a trigger or any other kind of variable. I'll hit submit there. And just to look at what this manifest and values YAML actually looks like, we'll dive into our file store where it's stored. We'll look at the deployment. It looks very similar to what we were doing previously, but we can see here we're actually using Go templating in order to define that this is actually going to be fed in by our values YAML, so values.image. And that metadata is being defined by this values YAML here. Now this can be hard-coded if we want, and we have customers that say, if it's going to this environment, these particular things are hard-coded. But as you can see here, this is a variable, and this is a harness-specific variable that basically says the artifact for this deployment, we're going to go ahead and pull the image and the tag and feed that into the deployment. And let's see what that looks like over here. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'll say that I actually want to run the Helm style deployment. I'm going to say the latest, and we'll populate tags depending on what you say. And we'll do run pipeline there. Now I notice that it says Helm style. We can do this for Helm templates and Helm charts, but we can also do this for basic Kubernetes manifests as well. So you don't need to be deploying Helm in order to take advantage of this templating methodology. And as we can see, we're already done. Everything looks good. Let's pop on over to Nginx. And we have my custom Nginx image built and deployed. All ready to go. So just to show you how easy it is to actually onboard a new service, I'm going to start completely from scratch and rebuild this basic Kubernetes manifest. So we go in, we click deploy, we say basic KAS part 2. I'm doing a Kubernetes style deployment. We can do Helm and Tanzu and a few others as well, but for now we'll focus on Kubernetes. Set it up. We have existing services we can deploy as well, but in this case I'm going to actually start from scratch. Basic KAS 2. I'm going to add my manifest. These are the different manifest types that we can support. For now we'll focus on just a Kubernetes manifest. And we can pull this manifest from a variety of different sources, including Git repositories, a custom remote one if you have a different remote store for it. In this case, we're just using the internal file repo and harness, so we'll focus on that. We'll say KAS part 2 for this manifest identifier. We'll jump in here, say basic Kubernetes. Since I want to deploy both of these, I could pick these specifically, or I can just say deploy them all in the folder. Apply selected. And in this scenario, we don't have a values YAML overriding any of these values, but we could also put that in here if that was the case. Hit submit. In this case, the artifacts are hard-coded, but we could add an artifact source here. We'll hit save. Continue. Now we can propagate environments from previous stages if we want, but we want to run this multi-stage. So I'll say that I want to deploy to my Nick prod environment. That's my prod environment. And environments can have multiple infrastructures. In this case, I'm just going to deploy to my laptop Kubernetes environment that's running a very small cluster. Continue. And now I get to select my execution. So I can run a basic rolling deployment. I can pick a canary deployment. I can have a blank canvas and define whatever I want, or even blue-green deployments. If I want to pick something like canary, we can also automatically add continuous verification steps in there that we can configure. So this continuous verification will allow us to roll back this particular canary deployment if we're seeing issues in our APM monitoring tools like Datadog, Dynatrace, New Relic, but that's for another video. I'll use that strategy. And we've gone ahead and frameworked your entire deployment for you. These scripts have everything they need in order to actually conduct and, if necessary, roll back this canary deployment. But that's all it takes in order to set up a basic Kubernetes rollout. Thank you so much for watching.